its ships assembled for several weeks at the designated harbour before departure. Once there were enough ships and enough escort vessels, Western Approach's headquarters would allocate it the safest known route across the Atlantic. On departing, only a handful of the convoy's senior officers would know its course and destination. In a typical convoy, the merchant ships would form 7 columns, each half a mile apart. The inner 3 columns, with the most valuable or explosive cargoes, would contain 5 vessels, and the more vulnerable outer columns would contain 4. In column, each ship sailed 600 yards apart. The formation was a broad front rectangle and would occupy a relatively small sea area of 6 square miles. The box-like formation had been adopted after it was found that long columns tended to string out, not only greatly increasing the visibility of the convoy, but leaving the tail enders highly vulnerable. The main benefit of the compact rectangle was the resulting short perimeter, along which 4 or more escort vessels patrolled. The size of a convoy could be considerably increased without the need for a corresponding increase in the number of escorting warships. Maneuvers in convoy were always dangerous, especially for inexperienced crews, and so were kept to a minimum. The Commodore, in a central ship towards the front, ordered the course changes. Early in the battle, this was brought about by the ships on the inside of the turn slowing down, while the whole formation wheeled around. However, this method forced the convoy to lose valuable speed. Later in the battle, the wheel was often replaced by a technique that had started out purely as an emergency maneuver. This was a sudden 45-degree turn, carried out simultaneously by all vessels. It greatly increased the risk of collision and left the convoy in an echelon that was disconcerting to the ship's captains. But critically, the convoy lost no speed, and with experience, it could be carried out with the ships still maintaining station. Convoy safety ultimately depended on strong escorts, and especially on secure communications. With such a shortage of escort vessels, security was more important than ever. Incapable of fighting it out, to survive, the convoys had to evade the U-boats altogether. By late August 1940, the German Navy was able to intercept and decrypt British naval signals early enough to mount powerful attacks. This allowed Admiral Dönitz to try out long-planned tactics to defeat the convoys. Dönitz, as a First World War U-boat commander, had already fought against convoys, and anticipating that the Allies would once again use the system, had developed a tactic to defeat it. Dönitz now had enough U-boats and good enough intelligence to implement the Rudel tactic, better known as the Wolf Pack. The Wolf Pack, given advance warning by German intelligence, would be disposed in a chain, often several hundred miles long, across the suspected course of a convoy. When one U-boat sighted the merchant ships, it then radioed the convoy's position and course back to headquarters. Headquarters then alerted all the nearest U-boats and vectored them towards the target. Once the U-boats found their prey, each commander was free to choose his own position from which to attack. Most remained a safe distance beyond the escorts and launched a fan of torpedoes at the convoy's flank. They hoped that out of 4 or 5 torpedoes aimed into the middle of the convoy, 1 or more would hit a ship. However, the bravest U-boat commanders waited for nightfall. They sailed slowly on the surface, evading the underwater detectors, steamed straight through the escort perimeter screen and right in amongst the merchant vessels. The U-boat's low silhouette and the inexperience of convoy lookouts enabled the commander to wreak havoc by picking off individual targets at almost point-blank range. As soon as a submarine attack began, the merchant vessels and their escorts immediately fired hundreds of flares and starshot, lighting up the sky in an attempt to reveal the U-boat's position. Even if they did see the enemy, at such short range, the escorts were unable to depress their deck guns low enough to hit the target. The escorts could still ram the submarine, but often, before they had a chance to do so, the U-boat had dived. The problem for the escorts now was finding the enemy. The German submarines usually stayed shallow, knowing that the Allied ASDIC underwater detector beam was at its most unreliable near the surface. Even if the escorts did discover the U-boat, they could still only fire depth charges from the stern. This meant they had to sail right over the enemy, and in so doing would lose ASDIC contact, and therefore any accuracy they might have had. At close range, the U-boats had all the advantages. The most steel-nerved U-boat commanders remained near the surface and close to a merchant ship. They bided their time until the panic was over, then quietly slipped away. The first real chance for the Kriegsmarine to form wolf packs came in early September 1940. The tactic soon proved devastatingly successful. Again and again, the U-boats ambushed lightly defended convoys, and by the end of the month, 59 Allied merchant ships had been sunk, the highest monthly total yet. In early October, German intelligence decrypted several British naval signals that gave them 4 days' notice of a slow convoy, SC-7, sailing from Canada. The Germans knew not just its time of departure, but also its course and speed. The nearest U-boats were immediately formed into a powerful wolf pack and placed in the path of the oncoming convoy. Convoy SC-7 contained 34 merchant ships and was sailing south of Iceland, escorted by a single sloop. On October the 15th, U-124, one of a screen of U-boats several miles apart, sighted a straggler, sank her, and the next morning found the rest of the convoy. It radioed headquarters and quickly sank 3 more merchant ships before being forced to submerge by the escort. U-boat headquarters immediately vectored in 6 submarines. An additional sloop and a Flower corvette arrived from Western Approach's command, but to little effect. Over the next 2 days, the 6 U-boats managed to sink 16 of the 30 remaining merchant ships. 60% of the entire convoy, more than 100,000 tons, were destroyed by the Wolfpack, without the loss of a single submarine. In the 4 months from June to October 1940, called the Happy Time, the U-boats had sunk 274 ships at 1.5 million tons.